when I was an undergraduate student, I didn't understand the connections between disparate academic fields. I thought that the study of history was only tied to that, the historiographical theories and the sources that we read to understand the past. That by only applying the specific theories and the specific types of sources could we truly create good history. Now that I'm working in a much more interconnected field, I've come to understand that history, economics, sociology, and so much more has an impact on what we study and how it informs our research, especially surrounding a field as broad as national security and global security. I now read so much more from fields that I never would have contemplated 15 years ago. I think that has made me a better scholar and to be able to communicate in ways that I would have never before have dreamed possible. Welcome in, NatSec nerds and IR baddies. I'm Morgan Houston, aka Whiskey Mo, the internet's least famous academic. I'm a scholar of national security policy, air power, irregular warfare. That list grows on the daily. And today I want to take you behind some of my thought processes between unique fields that are outside of what I study when I see something that piques my interest. And that was some research surrounding how we count population totals here in a global scale. And after we talk about that, I'm going to tell you all about how population growth ties in with national security. So why don't you stick around? Let's chat. Throughout my day when I'm at work at the university, I peruse a lot of different news sources. A lot of it is just current events, things from the various, legacy news media, as well as some other national security blogs, online journals, those kinds of things. And I came across an interesting article from Popular Mechanics, which I love to subscribe to something like Popular Mechanics. It's so outside of my bounds, but it allows me to see what is happening in science and engineering and kind of just keep up to date in a field that I'm not really an expert in it any sense. But what I found interesting was an article discussing two competing papers. The first came out of Finland at Aalto University, and it was published in the journal Nature Communications. This scholar and his cohorts have argued that we have miscalculated the amount of people here on planet Earth. Talking about the different data sets that we use to calculate the general population, which right now, according to most sources, is around 8.2 billion people across the globe. And using data from 300 rural dam projects, they calculated how many people were given compensation for them being forced to move and have claimed that the population estimate of the globe is off by anywhere between 50 and 83%, which is a staggering amount of people if you think about it. 50% would put us around 12 billion people. 80% would put us closer to 20 billion people on the globe. And what I find interesting about this is just one of the things that it happens in science, is that sometimes we can reevaluate our data and then we can come about and find new information. But then there was another article that was published in New Scientist, where a group from Hong Kong University stated that if this was the case, this would be a massive amount of people. And there are things that we need to understand when we're doing this research. And some of these people now, there is some inherent bias here with some of these people. One of the authors of this counterpaper runs one of the data sets that are constantly used. But this is what happens in academia. Is I talk about it when I tell my students about citations, about how sometimes you can go back and forth. And then I saw another set of papers in physics, which are not related, but it's one of those things that happen. And I think this is going to be interesting, because what this does is, even though both sides disagree on the current population count and some of the data sets and some of the methodology that is used, this may help to create some more accurate and more usable data. And that is really important for us to understand how population works, and then population informs so much more, including the services that we create for people, the types of services, the government services, the type of healthcare, the type of infrastructure that is needed. And like, those are really important things. And so as I'm reading these, my brain is going in a completely different space than what these people are thinking. They're talking about how the methodology, the data sets, how this works. Well, for someone like me, who is a national security researcher, what I think about when we talk about population is then we need to start talking about resources, and we need to talk about resource scarcity, and we need to talk about the conflict that is going to naturally arise from people. Because conflict and war, as Clausewitz says, is politics by another means. And what this means is politics is just a matter of interacting with people either at the nation state level or even at the interpersonal level. And generally speaking, it's all about conflict for resources. Now, conflict doesn't need to be I'm punching you in the face. It doesn't need to be wars, but there is a tension that builds when there are limited resources. I think about right now, one of the most important battles for resources in rare earth. And rare earth isn't necessarily about the rarity of the minerals, but about the processes of creating them and the locality of them. So these are things that create our cell phones, this camera that I'm working on, all of these specialized materials that are needed to create these items. And there's a tension there with it. But even more basic than that, when we think about what, the UN would consider human rights, food, medical care, safety, those kinds of things. As we are growing, as our population continues to grow, some of these resources are going to become very much more constrained. With changes in climate, with changes in temperature, the ability to grow food is going to decrease because the areas that are arable are now going to continue to shift north to the point where they are going to start decreasing. We only have limited resources when it comes to fossil fuels, when it comes to certain types of other energy producing items. So as the population continues to grow, we need to understand the conflict that comes about from growing populations. And if we have constantly undermined and underestimated our population counts across the globe, this means that our resources are even scarcer than we believed before. And a lot of the research around crime and terrorism tells us that terrorism and crime stems from poverty. And poverty is a scarcity of resources in a specific space. And as we look at the inequality across the globe, especially when we talk about places like the global south, places in certain parts of South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, we have less resources available for these people. And then that creates instability in population and makes people susceptible to extremist political beliefs. And this isn't necessarily just specifically to low income. We can see it within many parts of the quote unquote developed world. We see it within the US, within the UK, with extreme right wing beliefs that are on the rise right now. But add into that resource scarcity and then that discontent and that fight for culture war now becomes not only the culture, but now a fight for resources. And that instability increases the risk of internal conflict, of increased organized crime. And then once that instability stretches across a region and multiple neighboring nations are unstable, then that risk of conflict now goes from being intranational to now being international, so from being internal to external. And there's a lot of strong research in terrorism studies that shows that when unstable neighbors are next to a place that is in a security situation where there is internal conflict and internal terrorism, that then creates safe harbors for terrorists and insurgents to operate outside of the jurisdiction of the internal state that this conflict was once a part of. And then that can also drag in the states to now it's now an international conflict, a straight up conventional war. And you can see that even again within the so-called developed world. It started with Ukraine. Now it's, while the fighting has been constrained within Ukraine and Russia for the most part, it is still an international level conflict as we talk about North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine, the flow of weapons and money from the West into Ukraine. And just think of how much worse the conflict would be if now we're talking about not just political power for the sake of political power, but also you add resource scarcity, where now we're talking about Ukraine as being one of the massive developers or the massive growers of wheat and provides a massive amount of food for the rest of the world. Now they're fighting over that. How much more deadly would it be because now we need to feed people that we don't have enough food for? All of these are issues that become so much more critical when we talk about adding in resource scarcity. So this is really important. You can see how my train of thought is. And I challenge young scholars, and I think if any point, if you're watching this video, most likely you're going to be a scholar of some point, right? You're interested in the world, you're interested into the interconnectedness of things, and you're studying something. That's how you probably led yourself to me, where I can talk about things that are super niche but have impact on a daily basis. So what this means is that we need to encourage not only ourselves, but our students, our family, our friends to read things that are outside of our normal interest. Because what this does is it shows the interconnectedness of the world and the research about us. Physics creates technology, which creates weapon systems that can be used in national security. National security creates a more stable environment, which can lead to more prosperous and economic uplifting. In one of my most recent podcast episodes of the end of the week, which I'll put a link up in the video thing here. The long peace, if you understand it, which comes from international relations, the U.S. hegemony and creating a more stable world where there was less conflict, this has uplifted the economic situation of almost everyone on the globe, which has led to less conflict. But now, within the most recent spate of the last 20, 25 years, we are seeing a decoupling and destabling of the economic situation, especially now within the last 10 years, where we see the United States withdrawing from the international stage, and it is no longer a guarantee of security. So now the world is much more unstable, which has created a much larger chance of international conflict. So this is just my example of how you have to show the interconnectedness of the world through studying and at least having a basic fundamental understanding of other fields. You can't just be stuck within your niche. It is always helpful to have a broader sense of the world. So that is this video. I really want to thank you. I'm trying to make more videos that are going to be more focused on point, not this general podcast that I have done in the past. Again, check it out. There's going to be a link in the description you can check it out. At the end of the week, it is a national security and international relations news reviewed podcast. I'm very excited for it. I've been doing it for a couple of months now. Also, if you would please, as always, gently caress that like button. It really does help. It's funny. I had heard all the people on YouTube, because I love to consume content on YouTube, about how much it helps. And then I started making more videos, and I started noticing the videos that have more likes begin to be fed more into the algorithm. Also, go ahead, please subscribe. That shows YouTube that there's some value in this channel, that the work that I do in this communication space is important, and that people are learning from what I'm putting out there. And if you want to know when these videos come out, go ahead and hit the notification bell. It's really important for us to know that you are seeing these videos. It seems that YouTube is going to more short form content these days. I don't want that to be the case, but it is. If you want to know when any kind of video comes out on my channel, go ahead and hit that notification bell. And as always, I really hope that you gain something from this. And until next time, y'all, be well.